Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel that's helping you write better data pipelines. This is Data Engineer 1, and today on this episode of Let's Write Pipes, we're going to be talking about web scraping. So today I have for you a pipeline that I wrote that downloads images and text from the XKCD webcomic series. So what this pipeline does is it gets a list of comic IDs that I want to download. It'll download that list and then extract from the HTML that it downloads the URL for the comic itself, as well as the title for the comic. And the title is the little thing that shows up when you highlight over the image. So like when I highlight here, for example, it says my most famous drawing. It pulls that out from the HTML, and then it goes and it will download the image separately, as well as then combine the title and the image together in one go. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we've written for this pipeline. Um, and so there's a lot of reasons why you want to use Kedro for your web scraping. Um, a few of them, like right off the bat, it's Kedro again just makes it so easy to read the code constructs, and I'm going to be showing you some of the code constructs that we have here regarding this pipeline. Let me first make sure that there's nothing in the data directory, and then we'll go ahead and take a look here. So if we go inside of this source and then WK here, we can see inside of our pipeline.py our current pipeline. So let's go ahead and remove this, and actually let's go ahead and open up tmux as well. Okay, so here we have a few sub pipelines that are combined together to create one big pipeline. Let's go ahead and actually, is my face in the way if I open this up all the way here? A little bit, but that's okay. So here we have these four separate pipelines. We have a download HTML pipeline, process data, download images, and group images pipeline. Then at the very bottom, we have all four of these separate as well as one combination under the default. So when you have default here, that's the one that runs when you do Kedro run. And then if you have any of these names in the keys, that's what runs when you type in Kedro run -- pipeline. You can type in any of these names here. But for this pipeline, it's got 4 steps, right? The whole entire pipeline has these 4 main steps. The first step is generate the comic URLs. So we want to have the list of URLs that we're trying to download from XKCD. And then we actually go through and download those URLs. But if you'll notice here, I'm actually using a confirms. The reason why we have a confirms here is because this data set, this comic URLs data set, as well as the comic HTML, these are both incremental data sets. And so we have a video on incremental data sets, but to summarize really quickly, incremental data sets allow you to compute your calculations and computations incrementally. So that means that we don't have to go backwards, that if we've already done something, we're not going to do it again. And in web scraping, this is so useful because what happens usually is you'll run your download, right? And then if you have to keep downloading the website over and over and over, it just takes so much time, right? So as you can see already, the benefits of Kedro are very clear. You have this segmentation in the way that you write your data pipelines. In the beginning, what you would have is you have your download right here. Then you have your processing. Then you have another downloading and then another processing. Right? If you had all of this together in one single function, you would have to go through and do each one of these steps every time when you ran that pipeline. But thanks to the incremental data set, we're allowed this reprieve, and we can just download the HTML one time and not have to re-download it over and over and over again. Here, then the next part is that we process the HTML. And so what are we doing when we process that HTML? We're just extracting, again, the image URL as well as the title card. And then we download the images again, and then we group them. So what we do is we take the title and we use that as the image name, and then we use the image data for the image data. And so that way, we are left with a folder full of images from XKCD that are titled by that little title, and then that have the image as the image. So let's take a look at what those nodes actually look like. So let's go inside of here, sort of source to thing nodes. So right off the bat, very simple. We have our generate comic URLs, and so I'll make sure that we keep the pipeline open so you can see. Over here. So my face may still be in the way. Maybe if I do this, that'll help it out. Okay, great. So over here, we have this generate comic URLs. And so what we're doing is we're taking two parameters, as you can see on the left-hand side. We've got a parameter that's called start ID and a parameter called end ID. So these are the IDs that we want to incrementally step through in order to choose which comics we want. So what we're doing is we're just generating the URL based on those incrementing IDs. So XKCD makes it really easy to choose our IDs. Then what we're going to be doing is we're passing that back out as a dictionary that is keyed by that comic ID. And so we actually begin to use the comic ID itself as the canonical ID throughout the entirety of the pipeline. This makes it easy in order for us to combine data, as we'll see later on. Then we have this get URL function. And so the get URL uses very popular library requests in order to handle that HTML data. So we actually just pass in get, give it a URL, and then it returns the response. But notice here that I don't actually specify whether or not this is for a comic or if this is for an image. That's because we can reuse this function in order to download both our HTML and our images. So that's why it's so good, so good. And so here we go through and we download the HTML data. So this download URL HTML, this comes from right here. And the input comes directly from that previous node that we took a look at, which is this generate comics URL. So we're outputting a dictionary with the key being the comic ID and the URL being the value. So all we do is we just step through that dictionary and we say comic ID and then the URL value, and then we return that data. What's really important to note here is that the confirms comic URLs is telling Kedro that we have processed this incremental data set already. So we processed it up to the point that whatever is returned by this download URL HTML. This signals to Kedro that it can save a little checkpoint and say, okay, we've got everything done prior to this ID, only go and do the things after this ID. And I can show you what that looks like in just a second when we run the pipeline. Okay, as we continue on forward, we have this processed data. And so this is where we're actually doing the extraction. And for us, what we're doing is we're just using a simple regular expression to pull out that main image with the title, and then we're returning a new dictionary that contains those values. So we have this image metadata that's still keyed by that comic ID, the comic ID being the ID from the very beginning, and then it holds the URL and title for that image. What's really important here is that this processing in a normal pipeline with web scraping, this would all probably be done in the same single function. But because we're doing it like this, it allows us to choose the different places that we want to run the pipeline, and thus it makes it much easier for us to iterate on this. And we will be doing a little bit of iteration here. And then finally, we do a downloading of the images. So it's very similar to the previous one. In this case, we're actually not doing a confirms, though we definitely could do a confirms if we so choose. We can do that later on. And then finally, we group the images. And so because we use the comic ID as that canonical ID for every single dictionary passing, it makes it really easy for us to pull out exactly the image title that is matching to the image data that we got out of here. And then finally, we write that back out to disk. And how do we write these guys out? We use all these built-in data sets, actually. So it's really cool. We basically use incremental data set, and we use a bunch of text data sets. Each of these text data sets then come back here. And the real kicker is that we can still reuse this text data set in order to save our image files also. So text dataset is actually just a wrapper around file open, which means that we can pass in whatever arguments that we want to for that opening command. And so in this case, I'm just opening it with this write bytes. It's also read bytes in order to save our image data, which comes back as bytes. The reason why it comes back as bytes is because we specify it here on the top with this dot content, as opposed to dot text, which will give you back the text of the downloaded data using requests. And then finally, we just have this other incremental data set that will just generate the images based on the title here. Okay, and so what happens when we run this big boy? We hit Kedro run, and what it's going to do is it's going to first generate all of the URLs that we want to download. So those URLs are based, again, on the parameters that are set, and those parameters that we've set are actually written here. Let me just go ahead and just show you set of this base parameters, and they're start ID, end ID, 10, 20. So we're downloading comics 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then 20. Then after we generate all of those, we actually download them using using our gets, and then we extract the images here, the image metadata, and then we pass that into a new download function, as well as this grouping function, which will output it. So everything ran smoothly, ran correctly, very simple. If we look inside of our data folder, so if we go to data here, we can see that a find will show us our list of data. So right here at the very beginning, we can see our comic URLs, right? So these are all the URLs that we have for our comic that we want to run and download. Those are in the text files, as well as the checkpoint file. And so more details are in the incremental dataset video, but the checkpoint saves our place. Then we have our HTML, which is the HTML that we already downloaded. And through that HTML, that's when we start to extract the image metadata. So if we look over here, we have our image metadata that's being saved as a YAML file, which was what we specified inside of the catalog, as well as the images, which are coming back as JPEG. And then finally, we have our images here that are saved with the title. So we get to see the title, and then based on the title, we get to look at the JPEG. And that's just a little bit of flair. It's just a nice way to transform the data for us. Okay, but I already said that the incremental data set, thanks to the incremental data set, we actually make the pipeline faster. And that is proven here by doing this Kedro run again. We actually get to skip, we get to skip downloading the HTML. But we're not skipping the download of the images. And so that's actually something that we do want to skip. Let's go ahead and add an extra confirms here. So this confirms the image metadata. The confirmation on the image metadata means that we've already downloaded the images for that particular metadata. And in fact, actually, we shouldn't put the confirms there, because if the pipeline fails before that point, then we will not be able to run this last bit, which is the grouping. And so we actually want to put the confirms onto here, on this image metadata. I'm sorry, onto this group images. So that's because when we run the pipeline, right, we want to make sure that we do all the processing on that incremental data set that we want to do, and then we can confirm that it's been completed. In this case, we have to do two things, right? We have to download the image, and then we have to group the image in order to consider that that image metadata is complete. And so that's what we've done here. And if we rerun the pipeline again, it's going to be like super blindingly fast. And then we also see, if we look inside of our data folder, we can find the different checkpoints. So we have the checkpoint for comic URLs, which shows the position that we've already downloaded for the comic URLs, as well as the position that we've already downloaded for our image metadata. So if we actually do cat really quick, let's see, and there it is, image 20, and then this one also will be comic 20. Okay, cool. So now that we've done that, there's a few things that I do want to modify though, right? And so some of those things are, in particular, the way that we save the data, right? If we take a look, the data that comes back here, it looks okay, except for the fact that there's still this URL encoding, right? This HTML encoding here. So let's definitely get rid of this so we can have our proper, our proper apostrophes. I think that would look much better. And so thanks to the fact that we are doing this kind of incremental data downloading, it actually becomes easier for us to recompute, right? So over here, the image title is what's coming back out. So we want to go to this one and we want to use the HTML library. And then inside of this HTML library, they have this thing called unescape. So we want to do html.unescape on this image title, and that should give us the proper quotation mark. However, if we were to run this pipeline right now, is it going to work? Well, actually, no, not quite. Unescape. And it's not going to work, not because of the typo. Oh, actually, is this? Oh, HTML. Oh, I see. That's because we're actually overwriting the HTML thing. So we actually have to do HTML as HTML lib. We'll put that here. Then we'll put this here. So not only is it not going to work because of my bugs, but it's also not going to work because of our checkpoints. So we put in a whole bunch of checkpoints here, which means that Kedro is actually not going to necessarily recompute some of that data, right? So if we look inside of the data folder again, and it should be inside of the primary, we can see that we still have the same images here. They're still stuck with these, with these bad naming convention. So what we have to do is we actually have to remove that checkpoint that we actually just took a look at. This is the image metadata checkpoint. So we actually got to remove this guy, remove that checkpoint, and then we're also going to remove the data here for the primary layer, and then we will rerun this guy. And the reason why we want to remove that primary layer data is so that we can just show the images, the new images that come back. So when we rerun again, we're actually going to do the download. So notice how it's going much slower here on this download portion, right? And that's because we're actually re-downloading those images. And then if we do that find one more time, we will see that our apostrophes are in place. They are standing at the lip of the canyon, which isn't clear at all. Cool. Okay, so that all works. You can also see if we modify the parameters, it will also begin the download from whichever parameters we have here. So we've already gotten images 10 to 20. Let's go ahead and grab images 10 to 30. When we run this pipeline again, it's not going to download 20, but it will download 21, 22, etc., etc. So see how we're stopping again here at this download URL HTML. And then while that's running, I'm going to go ahead and start up a Kedro viz so we can take a look at it one more time. So we're going to do Kedro viz, and we can see the pipeline visualized. And by the way, this pipeline is available for you guys on GitHub. I have the link in the description so you can take a look for yourself. But if you see here, we have the entirety of the pipeline. We have our start ID, end ID parameters. Then we can generate the comic URLs. It goes saved into this comic URLs data set. We download the URL HTML, it saves in the comic HTML data set. Then we extract the images. And then here we do a little bifurcation where we grab the image data from the website, save it as images, and then pull it into the save image by titles. If we take a look only at the nodes themselves, the pipeline becomes a little bit more clear. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If you guys like this content, I really appreciate it if you guys would button that like and sub that scribe and ring that ding if you guys want to know when we are pipelining. And if you have any questions or considerations that you would like me to cover in these videos, please just go ahead and leave a comment below and I'll get to it as soon as possible. I really want to make content that you guys appreciate, that you guys like. Because I super love it. I love teaching you guys. I love running through these pipelines because it also helps me practice my pipeline skills, and I hope it makes your pipelines better too. Okay, thank you again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.